back. And while we're trying to get the video working, I could tell you all the UDP jokes, but I don't know if you get it. So those are the more minded might catch that.
Yeah, that was
the best I got, everybody. So.
That was a dad joke.
It was a dad joke.
What happened here? Okay, yeah, there we go. All right.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
All right, we'll go ahead and get going here. This talk is on, as you can see, I'll be talking about zero trust. And to kind of get going through here, I wanted to give a little bit of background on this talk because it's going to be somewhat relevant. This involves the entire GitLab security team. I'm just kind of a representative of that. I've been doing a lot of blogging on the topic and whatnot, so and I am doing a lot of research on this subject as well, so I was kind of thrown in there into the mix. Myself, I've been in the industry for several decades. I've basically been in InfoSec for the past 25 years or so as my exclusive day job, I guess you would call it. I have worn a number of different hat colors over the years. I started out as a black hat, breaking into probably many of your systems that are here today. Sorry about that. It was a long time ago. But I continue to wear several different hat colors. It's just sheer coincidence I happen to have a gray hat on today. That doesn't mean or imply anything. But nonetheless, I do have a pretty varied background. For a long time, it was either IT admin or InfoSec professional by day, hacker by night kind of a thing, more or less. But I'm doing the InfoSec thing I've been doing it for a while. And like I mentioned, one of my projects at GitLab as a researcher happens to be zero trust. And we're talking specifically about getting zero trust in for the company itself, for the employees of GitLab. I'm not going to include any of the fancy charts and diagrams that people usually show with zero trust, where they got particularly the big diagram that belongs to Google and their Beyond Corp paper. I'm not going to include that in there because that might imply that I'm trying to get you to think a certain way, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be discussing specifically what we've been doing at GitLab. In that this is the steps that we've been going through implementing this stuff, so hopefully I can have some, either I can get you to think about things in your own situation that can apply to you if you're thinking about doing any of this kind of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and define zero trust, but I'm only defining this in the context of this applies to GitLab. It may play out completely differently in your organization. Probably the first thing is user identification, being able to specifically identify a user. And I'm not talking specifically about an account and a password. I'm talking specifically about identifying that, yes, Alice is logging in and Alice is who she says she is, that kind of thing. Same thing for device identification, being able to identify when Bob logs in that is Bob's, computer he's supposed to be logging in with. We've identified that it's, patched and properly configured and that kind of thing. That would be device identification. Data classification. This one's kind of weird. A lot of people say there's, you should have public, internal, and then there's like the segmented parts and stuff like that. We do it slightly different. We have 4 tiers. It's detailed in a blog post, and I'll have a link to a way to get to all the blog posts on the last slide that you can look at. But basically what it boils down to is we have green for public and red for the most critical data, and there's also orange and yellow in there in between. And I'll kind of cover it here in an example coming up, a little bit what we mean by that. It's not specifically about data in as much as it's about information, okay? And there is a distinction to that, because a lot of times the data represents information, and within context, even though the data doesn't change, the information could mean something completely different. Access controlled systems. This means that we don't want to implement something that we don't have some semblance of control, where we can actually prevent either a person or a process from accessing it except in a way that we want. And so we need to be able to have that. And having defined policies and a way of, handling and administering those policies to do all the other stuff on this slide and make it to where stuff isn't bad, which I believe is the marching orders of all security departments: make stuff not bad. Now, some issues that we've kind of encountered when we started looking for solutions on this, and this predated me because I've been at GitLab since February, and this predated me before I got there, but there really didn't seem to be any agreement on what zero trust was by various vendors. And I'm not going to point any fingers or use any names, but yeah, they all had their own vision and version that they would try to push upon you. And everyone kept referring to BeyondCorp, and I don't know if hopefully if you're into the zero trust thing, you are at least vaguely familiar with this thing. BeyondCorp was the Google model that was a response to a breach that they had by a nation state that came after certain elements of them and took advantage of their unique architecture and whatnot. So they were able to, they went through and said, okay, we need to change things in our model and how we do security. And they came up with this thing specifically for them. And they went ahead and put a paper out so that everyone could read it, so they could learn from it and then go do their own thing. And instead, vendors just latched on and said, we're doing BeyondCorp, so you don't have to worry about it. And no vendor has a complete solution, regardless of what they tell you. No vendor does. All right? They don't, trust me. So basically with these vendors, we had one that isn't Google trying to sell us an incomplete version of an internal Google solution to my company, which meant that it wasn't going to work. There was no way it was going to work. And that was kind of a tough realization to deal with. It's just like, what are we going to do? Maybe we can do a partial solution. We can just say, okay, well, one of those elements that we had that we're trying to implement, maybe we can take just one of those and use that and implement that. So, going to these vendors, a lot of them, this is traditionally what they would make. They make assumptions to a certain degree, and they have to because they've got to market their products and whatnot to companies. And part of it, they say, okay, well, you're doing zero trust, you're going to have to remove your perimeter, and maybe there's a vendor that has features or something that's a part of it where that works well for them. They can help you as you remove your perimeter. That's a part of their product or whatever. And then there's, well, we can help because we can help you dismantle your VPN because you're not going to need your VPN anymore. That could be an interesting thing that they may have as a part of their offering. Typically, few remote workers, we've got some solutions that while we're putting this thing in, we can actually address the fact that you have this small percentage of your organization that has remote users, and we can help you. And that's good, right? And they also say, well, look, you're probably implementing some cloud stuff. We've got a way to help with on-prem and cloud. And they may have some stuff that has to reside on-prem, but it can still talk to the cloud, that kind of thing. So there are a variety of things like that we're kind of at play. And then they also assume asset management. And I'm going to guess that pretty much everyone in here does some form of asset management. And I'm not talking just about, the servers or containers or cloud presences, but the actual laptops people have. All right, that's great. Well, the thing is, we had a completely different reality at GitLab. And so that kind of caused some problems for us dealing with vendors. First off, we have no perimeter. We never had one, ever. No perimeter at all. Never did. We do not have a VPN. No VPN at all. No perimeter, no VPN. We are a 100% all remote worker company. The CEO, the headquarters is the CEO's apartment out in California, and that is not a joke, that's real, okay? It's just, we're all remote. We're all cloud. We have been from the beginning, and we will continue to be moving forward. There's no on-prem whatsoever. And unfortunately, we have limited asset management. And the area where we have the most problems is in BYOD. We only started buying laptops for employees a couple of years ago. Before that, it was BYOD. GitLab started as a fork of an open source project, okay? That's how GitLab started. Everyone was working from home. That's what they all, just use whatever you have and contribute. We still do that to a large degree. We're what you call open core. So the majority of our product is free, and you can get to the source code that's out there on the internet, and anybody anywhere can contribute to that, make changes and whatnot. And we've applied that to unbelievably huge amounts of our company, which is going to seem even worse when I get to some later slides. It's really not. It's actually kind of freeing in a way. But the point is just we've got a really good handle on our infrastructure as far as what we've got in the cloud, and all of our servers and containers and instances and what have you. We have a really good handle on all that stuff, and can scale and do everything with that. That part's great. It's just that the asset management thing is somewhat limited. So as you can imagine, we can't rely on a single vendor for Zero Trust to work at all. Most of them are selling, their solution it solves part of a problem that we've already solved or that does not apply to us. Okay? So, there's a few other pain points that I did want to cover that will kind of drive home some of this even more. Data classification is fluid, and I wanted to give you an example of this with something that happened somewhat recently to us. We had a customer, just for those of you that don't know, GitLab is a web-based DevOps lifecycle management kind of company. Okay, that's what we do. And we had a customer of ours that reported a problem, and this customer, for them it was serious. It meant that they could potentially have their private code breached. And because they were doing all their code development, they were doing it on GitLab systems. And so in our classification ranking, it ended up being orange. That was that's considered orange data. All right. Now, after evaluation, it's like, this can affect multiple people, multiple customers. So now it's been elevated to red data. Once we go through and we figured out a way to mitigate it, and then very quickly we had this thing patched, and that process, I can't remember, it didn't take a long time to do this, but because we're all about that whole, DevSecOps thing of rapid development, security a part of the process and everything like that. So we were very quickly able to patch our code and then get the patch pushed out and do our notifications and whatnot. At that point, the data becomes green data, except for the company that reported the data to us. They didn't want their name associated with this. They didn't want anyone to know that they were using us as a resource, because they felt that might put a target, because, hey, our code is located in this place. And so just to kind of help them, and this is just something that, we do, just, if you don't want to tell anybody your stuff's here, you don't have to. And we'll keep it private for you. And that's exactly what they did. And so the fact that their name is associated with it, that became yellow data. I think it may have been orange. I can't remember exactly. But nonetheless, during that process, at any point, if someone is going to authenticate and you have a policy that says this person cannot access red data, or this person can only access, green and yellow data, the data classification could change at some point during the day after they've done their initial authentication. So we needed to look at ways to be able to make sure that we can enforce on a transaction by transaction basis that our data policy and adhere to that. And so that's been we're doing pretty good in that arena because we have pretty good access controls on our stuff. And there's been areas where we've had to, write some stuff to improve that or implement something to improve that. But there you have it. That's a pain point that we have to deal with. So any solution we have for any part of any of this stuff that we're talking about, that comes to mind. That comes to the forefront. Oops, went too far there. But nonetheless, provisioning and deprovisioning is hard. I'll talk about that one first. We had, and this was when I started there, if we had this process in place, so you get a new employee, and it was already weird enough because once you signed your paperwork, they immediately started creating your accounts and everything. And of course, it's digital signature because we're all remote. You're not going anywhere for onboarding. And then they ship you a laptop. And hopefully you get your laptop before the first day of work. And so they start creating all these accounts on all these different systems. And I haven't mentioned this, but I say cloud-based. We're in the middle of doing some transitioning and whatnot. And there's some things we're keeping on certain systems for various reasons, but it's complicated. But we're on 4 different cloud providers, okay? Mainly on 2, but we're on 4 different cloud providers. And as far as SaaS applications go, I think as of, when I submitted the slides or submitted the talk, for acceptance for this conference, we were at well over 70 different SaaS applications. And I think we've probably upped that by at least probably 10 We probably got rid of a few, but there's probably a net gain of 10. And so so you can imagine that provisioning accounts is kind of a nightmare. And yeah, when I first started there, it would take 2 or 3 weeks to do that. And of course, the worst thing you want to find is that all of a sudden you have, Alice is looking at some system and she sees that here's an account on some container, some important, Linux server that's running of Bob, and Bob hasn't been an employee for 3 months. That's just like, oh my gosh, how did we miss that? Well, deprovisioning is probably harder. And that was the thing. When I was hired, I was probably employee number, I don't know, maybe 400 something. And this was in February, and we're now at over 1,000. And we're going to be at about maybe, I don't know, by March, we're expecting to be around, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,200 or so, maybe more. We're having just all this dynamic growth that's going on, and we're still trying to do all this stuff. And like I said, we barely have asset management. Now, I'm talking specifically about laptops. We're a Mac shop mainly. That's what we're buying for all the employees are Macs. We will purchase a Dell for them that ships with Ubuntu Linux that they could use for Linux if they want. And most people end up just wiping it and loading on their favorite flavor of Linux, and that's fine. But nonetheless, that's the 2 main operating systems we support. Windows isn't allowed. But I'll be very frank with all of you, we don't have a way to enforce that yet. We really don't. We can see it. We can see the violations that occur, but we really don't have a way to enforce it. So we're working on that. We've got Fleet Smith in for managing the Macs, and that's that's implemented now. And so that's what we're using for all the Macs at this point. And so we've got some semblance of some control over at least a majority of our workstations, but we still are having some problems managing that. It still doesn't mean that someone can't decide to log in from their iPhone or from their Surface or whatever it is they're logging in from. So, our plan, we decided not to focus so much on zero trust stuff that vendors were selling. If they had zero trust-like properties, it's like, okay, well, we'll look at those and see if that's something that we can use, and it's something that we can integrate in with what we're currently doing. And we had to reduce everything down to basics. It all had to come down to just the most basic components, and then solve for those individual components, such as device management, such as user provisioning and things like that. We just had to reduce everything down to raw components to see what we could cobble together from all of these various vendors. We have to solve for each one of those basics. We had to find budget for it, which is, as you can imagine, would be tricky, particularly if we found something that was really nice and sweet, and it costs a lot of money. We'd have to figure out, and right now that's basically it's coming out of the security budget. I mean, that's because it's security related. But, fortunately, we're a part of engineering and all that, so that's. But nonetheless, it's going to hit the bottom line somewhere. And then we have to tie all this stuff together. We have to make every bit of this stuff actually work, where we can actually kind of make it cohesive. If you're going to write a policy and that policy covers more than one of these basics, all this stuff has to actually work together. And we're still not quite there. So some of the things we identified were we wanted to have user authentication with 2FA. We wanted to be able to provision and deprovision in minutes, not days or weeks, like it was when I first started there. Secure communications. We wanted everything that's talking to each other, between the various subsystems, we wanted it all to be secured and encrypted. Believe it or not, there were some cases where it might not necessarily be that way, and we wanted to make sure it was that way. Audit access controls is kind of a loaded little point on here. We wanted to be able to have a way to go in and audit all the controls we had available to us for a particular component, APIs, everything associated with that. And we also needed a way to track their usage. We wanted to be able to say if someone used this API, if someone used this particular subcomponent or whatever, can we track that? We wanted to be able to do both of those things. And of course, manage assets, like I mentioned. That was another huge one. Like I said, we've gotten the infrastructure part of it down. All of our cloud stuff, we can manage that pretty well. And this one, it may seem like a weird one to have in there for 2FA. This is one of the ones that I was really adamant about doing, which was detection and tracking of anomalies. When someone decides to try to bypass or not use the elements of our zero trust solution, we wanted to be able to see that and see what they're doing to some extent, so we can make some semblance of a decision on that. So let's talk about some of these individually and what we did or are doing. User authentication with 2FA. We went with Okta. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with Okta. Probably see a few people nodding their heads, hands going up. Yeah, we're using Okta, and we gave the users, this is another thing, I'll touch on it. Well, no, I'll touch on it now. I'll just go do it now. We have a very, very open company, and we get a lot of feedback from our user community. From the employees and everything. We wanted to make sure if we're going to implement two-factor that we try to give them a choice. So one of our big conferences where we occasionally get together every 9 to 12 months, we'll all fly to some city on the planet because we're a global company. We're in 60 countries, spread out all over the place. When we get together like that, we handed out a whole bunch of YubiKeys. Every attendee got YubiKeys, and if someone wants a YubiKey, they can simply buy one and expense it, and it's, just practically instantly reimbursed, because this is just like this is a no-brainer. If they want a YubiKey, fine, they can do a YubiKey. If they want to, like what I opted for doing was, I have the Okta Verify app on my phone because I'm extraordinarily lazy and I can authenticate two-factor using my Apple Watch because I'm so lazy I can't reach into my pocket to get my phone, but I can get to my wrist. So, I'll do that. But I mean, that's what we ended up doing for user authentication, and that worked out really well. The other thing that it actually helped with was the provisioning and deprovisioning. As a company that's, integrated all these different, because Okta integrates with all these different SaaS applications. Most of these SaaS applications will speak something, they'll allow for SSO, a lot of them talk SAML. And so we kind of pseudo de facto standardized on SAML. And now it's a part of an evaluation process when we're evaluating a new SaaS company that we're wanting to get. A part of it is like, hey, can you talk to Okta, or do you have SAML support so we can figure out a way to make you talk to Okta? And what happened with this is that One of the things we have, we use Bamboo HR. Is anyone familiar with Bamboo HR? A few hands. All right, well, it's an HR type SaaS application. And very popular with startups and whatnot. When, excuse me, when HR creates a new employee in Bamboo HR, that auto-populates out to Okta, and then Okta goes out and creates all of those accounts. And this is based upon the user's title and the department they're in, and even some groups that they're associated with. And so that gets to be auto-populated. We can do the same thing when we deprovision. So all of a sudden, they leave, they say, you know, I submit my resignation. Boom, someone can go in there and deactivate their account on everything. And that's been a huge thing. An area that we're still working on this is, as you can imagine, we do have these administrators of our infrastructure. And these are people who's independent of our coders, for example, that are doing all the development. But we have this infrastructure group, and for them, they were just like, this is unbelievably painful to create a new user. And now you're telling me, you stupid people, you granted my wish, I'm getting 50 new employees in the next month. I'm going to have a couple of engineers spend days going into all of these systems to create accounts for these particular people. And they came to security and said, look, this Okta thing's really cool. Is there something along those lines that will actually work for us? And there actually was. There's Okta for ASA, I think it's called. And it does SSH and RDP, and we use it for SSH. And so it will even allow us to provision accounts. And so and we're thinking about, we're possibly rolling that out to our developer community as well. So that all the stuff that they have to SSH into to do their stuff, that we have some semblance of control over that as well. So that's really kind of worked. So we think we've got a pretty good handle between the two-factor and the provisioning and deprovisioning. Oh, I should mention on the two-factor, in some instances where we had something that was basically hosting red data, we went ahead and added a third factor for some of those things. Bamboo HR example, you can log in at the beginning of the day into Okta, and then you get the Okta dashboard, and you click on the app, and if you click on Bamboo HR, it's going to ask for another factor. It's usually the same two-factor, but it's going to say, okay, you're going to have to prove it again, just to make sure. And just kind of a good policy that we were able to implement that way. By the way, I'm not trying to make this, I don't work for Okta. I work for GitLab. It probably sounds like a commercial for them. But that part of what they were doing worked for us. It really did. The secure communications thing, this was one of these really weird ones. As you can imagine, we have GitLab, we participate with the HackerOne bug bounty program, and have been paying out a lot of money to people to find bugs in our stuff. And I think we're even trying to, improve like how quickly we pay and stuff like that, because we're really trying to encourage that, because it's been very, very helpful for us. And someone had found a flaw and I won't go into details, but basically it had to do with a form of pseudo injection, as it were, when it came down to it. And we were looking around for solutions, and since we're based on open source, it's just like, well, is there any type of open source product that's out there? Is there any type of thing that we can do? Because this specifically could be taking advantage of the fact that, you have like one system is trying to communicate with another system, but it's got to go through a cluster, and so it's just like you've got to specify something, and so we needed some way to kind of manage all of that anyways. We're looking at solutions for this, and we ended up using this thing called Camo Proxy. And Camo Proxy, the thing that was really cool about it was that security departments looking at it were saying, this thing is awesome because by default, it makes sure that you're doing encrypted communications between nodes. And then someone said, hey, I got an idea, so we don't run into this problem again. Why don't we just implement this everywhere in the company? And then it's just like, sure. And so we instantly have, not only did it solve a current and possibly future security problems, it actually ended up securing our communications. So it's kind of a nice little side benefit there, that all of our communications were taken to that level. On the auditing of access controls, we're still working on that one. There is an effort going on right now we can do this manually. We're looking, and we're still doing it manually because we're not done. This is a hard problem. And we're looking for ways to solve this, where we can actually go through and just say, okay, we've got all the, you'd think that because a lot of it's our own code that we'd know, but still, it's just like, but we don't have auditing. We may not have auditing turned on to everything we want. And then you've got issues with data retention. You've got issues with, because we've got employees all over the planet, so you've got like different jurisdictions where different privacy laws apply. And as a general rule, to make things easier, it's just like, okay, what's the most strictest policy out there? We're just going to do that, implement that company-wide because it's just easier than trying to go region by region, So we're having some difficulty with that, but we're getting there. Managing assets, that's still another kind of a tricky one, like I mentioned, we got the servers and instances and all the container stuff down pretty good. We're going to have to figure out something for mobile devices. I don't know what we're going to do there. It was an informal poll of our security department. And our security department is pretty big, by the way. It's actually because the upper management was so keen on security. The number of people in the security team is a direct percentage of the total user population of the company. So as the company grows, we grow. And that's kind of nice to have that kind of built in there. And this is also, the security team is not just researchers like myself, but also there's application security. There's people that are doing SecOps, the day-to-day stuff. There's a team that handles nothing but abuse that occurs. There's a team that handles compliance and a red team and field security, which talks to the rest of the company about what we're doing security-wise and whatnot. So there's a whole big effort there, and an informal survey of just the security team who should know better. There are violations of our BYOD policy, because technically you're not supposed to be accessing anything from phones. Technically. We all do it though. It's just, we're willing, as a security team, we're willing to accept the risk that something could happen down the line and someone might say, hey, I need to see what's on that phone. Not the company, but just, there's outside forces that could, as a part of some whatever, it could happen. The chance of that happening is extraordinarily small. And since we're into risk assessment in the security department, we've all done the math in our head and said, well, I'm going to get hit by lightning twice before that event happens, so I probably will be okay. If it happened once, I'm going to go play the lottery instantly, I'll tell you that. But this ties into the detection and tracking of anomalies thing. This is something we've started. We're in the process of coming up with a way to collect all these logs and all this log data so that we can do some really interesting things that against logs that aren't 100% obvious. And to give you an example of that is like, let's say that I have, so I pick on Alice and Bob a lot. Let's say that Alice logs in from Seattle, which is where she works, but her authentication is, or her two-factor authentication is occurring from a different time zone or a different continent. Okay, that's something that's kind of odd. There may be something up with that. Now, it could be, and this could happen, it's like just say, midday she's logged in from one place, and then in the afternoon, all of a sudden, she's logged in, according to her logs, from the other side of the planet. Now, she could be going to a coffee house and logging in from there and using a personal VPN, and the personal VPN is then, going through a server that's located somewhere on the other side of the planet. That kind of makes sense. In some cases, that might explain why, on a two-factor thing, that it's coming from different places. We want to be able to track that kind of odd anomaly. Now, if these things are coming from different systems, we want to be able to track that. There's some geolocation type stuff that we might want to be able to do. If we're able to pull something up off the phone that says one thing, or and it doesn't match up with, the other, we want to be able to pull all those odd things. If you have processes running that shouldn't be running except as a result of someone logging in and launching a job, and then all of a sudden those processes just kick off on their own, that's an anomaly that we want to be able to note, because it could mean that there's something going on that was not intended. So that ties into that, and if we could somehow then affect access associated with those actions, then we can make that a part of our not only would it's pretty cool to be able to do that, but we make that kind of a part of our whole policy involving access. So that's something we're kind of working on. My advice, if you're doing this stuff, obviously you're going to have to get upper management to support this. We're lucky in that case that security is way up on the list. It's one of the top, it's in the top 3. Okay, and the breaking things down into simple components is just a must. You just have to do that. That's the only way to get this kind of thing implemented. We couldn't just come in and do these. The last thing you want to do is to be adapting whatever a vendor says to do to your environment. You shouldn't have to change your environment to accommodate a vendor. It should be the other way around. You should be saying, I'm going to take this, and this from this vendor and make it work for me. It should be the exact opposite. Look where you're have areas where you're winning and then capitalize on that. For us, we were winning with Okta, and so we ended up saying, what else can this thing do? And that's why we're implementing some of these other features and stuff that maybe at the beginning, if we tried to sell this entire thing to upper management, it might have been a harder sell, but by doing it piece by piece, we're able to say, well, hey, remember when we had HR personnel running around trying to track down people to create accounts on 70 plus systems? We don't have to do that anymore. It just happens in minutes. Think about the productivity gains that we got in that. In a lot of ways, you can start doing that kind of thing. You're taking all this tedium out of it, and you're saving people money individual departments and ultimately the company, then you go for it. And that's what we've done. We've tried to capitalize on everywhere where we're winning, where we can do that. And like I said, just ignore the vendor spin. Just realize their solutions may not be yours. How about a few culture things? This specifically is probably more security related in general than zero trust related. But the adoption of new ideas, it does work a lot better when you have end user input. At GitLab, if you wanted to know how we did a certain thing or what our policies are, you people out there now, can go to our website and look it up. The handbook for the company is online and it is open to the public. We put almost every single thing we have up and online and make it public. One is kind of a part of that whole open source thing, so we figure others could probably benefit from this. And two, it just it gives us it kind of helps we are kind of holding ourselves accountable. And so that's why we do that. And we go ahead, like some of the ideas we've had on some of these things came from unbelievably simple suggestions from regular employees saying, hey, why can't you do this? And just like, wow, we never thought of that. And so, I mean, during your onboarding process at GitLab, you're supposed to make at least one change to the manual to improve it, to the handbook. And the handbook is it. That's every policy, everything is all written down. So you want to see a lot of our policies. You want to see what our infrastructure looks like with the goofy map with all the stuff. You can look at it. It's all online. It's all just very open. And so we've consistently tried to go to the users and try to see what's going to make them happy and make their lives easier. And if we can come up with if there's a solution and it's got two routes, one, they're not going to like it, and two, they are going to like it, we're going to go with the one that they're going to like, because then they'll use it. And that's a big deal. We always try to leave things better for the users than when we started. That's just, and this may sound really stupid, but back when I was a black hat and I was breaking into computer systems, before I'd leave, I typically would patch the hole. I'd try to clean up after myself. I didn't leave a lot of junk out there in the logs. I cleaned all that up, and I went ahead and patched the hole. I mean, I left things a little bit better than when I got there. I had ethics when I was committing felonies. So, but nonetheless, I mean, just doing that for the people that you work with makes a huge difference. And what it boils down to is if you've got something that's extremely hard, if it's going to be extremely hard to implement or extremely complex for people to understand, then don't do it. It's that simple. If it's really that hard and complex, don't do it. Do something simple. There's got to be a simpler way to do things. We've been finding them. I mean, you just got to look. That's the only thing. You got to look. That's part of that whole research thing in my job. And so for applying that to zero trust, it should make things easier. And if it doesn't do that, then you need to find another solution. That's it. That's the best part of the zero trust thing. It should make things quicker, easier, and faster, and more secure. It can be done. All right, that's the end of it. We've got a little bit of time, so if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. It could be about any of this or security in general. I don't care. I'll answer whatever. But nonetheless, thank you very much. I do appreciate it. Thank you.